Welcome to this week's edition of Dugout Dish Podcast. I'm Andy Kirikides, joined by my co-host Keith Glasser. How we doing, Keith?
Great. How are you?
I'm good. Got a special guest on tonight, courtesy of one of our good friends. Made a awesome connection for us, and looking forward to talking to him. So I'm gonna give a quick introduction here. He's a Pennsylvania native. Played his college baseball at Millersvile University in Pennsylvania. For those of you who don't know, stellar Division II program. Coach Sheehan's got those guys humming right now. He was drafted in the 12th round of the 2013 Major League Baseball draft. He's made his debut on August 14th against the Tampa Bay Rays. He's got 317 appearances in the big leagues. He's coming off an awesome season where he had 69 appearances and a 1.52 ERA. He's a current member of the Toronto Blue Jays, and we're pretty fired up to have Tim Mayza on tonight. So, Tim, thanks for the time, man. Appreciate it.
No, thanks for having me. Excited to be on here and talk some baseball. So let's do it.
Heck yeah. Well, we try to do this to everybody. Give the listeners like a little bit of background, where you're from and kind of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah. So from Pennsburg, Pennsylvania, I currently reside in Lancaster, but down here in Florida currently, getting ready for spring training. But no, from Pennsburg, Pennsylvania, went to Upper Perk High School in Montgomery County. And then from there, went to Millersville for 3 years. Got drafted out of Millersville in the 12th round. Made my stops along the way through the minor leagues. Was fortunate to get a call up. And then the rest is kind of history, some ups and downs in between. I had Tommy John surgery in 2019, so missed the 2020 season, which ended up being the COVID season. So somewhat, I guess, blessed that it happened at that time, knowing what those guys had to go through to get a season in, and then kind of have put together some solid years coming off of Tommy John. But yeah, been lucky to be with a great organization, and so yeah, just super fortunate. But no, didn't happen without some ups and downs along the way as well.
Yeah. How far are you guys out? You're like 12 days out from officially starting pitcher catcher. Is that right? Or is it 11 days or?
So pitchers and catchers official report date's February 14th.
Okay.
But being from Pennsylvania and knowing the challenges that come with off-season training up there, especially when you're trying to get rolling through winters, usually you're all right when college kids come back and they train with you, and you might be able to find a catcher to catch some bullpens early January. But once their seasons get rolling, finding somebody to throw to turns into a bit of a challenge. And it's nice to get down here a couple weeks early, get the family settled in, get your routine settled in, be able to go outside. I would say majority, if not all, of my throwing is done inside, and usually I'll long toss in a tunnel and kind of turn a hit tracks around. That way, it gives me a rough estimate of kind of intensity and distance on long toss days. But it's nice to get down here a couple weeks early, get out of the cold, and touch the mound, put your cleats on, and get into your spring training routines.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, we've all been through it up north. Like, you can get a lot done inside, but it's just way better if it's a little bit warm and you get a chance to put those cleats on and touch some dirt. So I'd love to hear about your recruiting process and kind of what that looks like. Like, we help families navigate this process, right? Like, and we have this podcast to try to shed some light on that and, in general, talk baseball. But, you've got an interesting path, right? Like, not everybody goes from Division II to the big leagues. And I'd love to hear about like kind of your development and how your recruiting process kind of unfolded.
Yeah. So it's crazy because I think some of the events that I was recruited at, or even kind of jump started my recruitment, don't really exist anymore, or kind of, are looked at as like old school. When I was coming through American Legion, Senior Legion was a big thing. And especially where I went to high school, it was huge. Like, your entire high school team then just moved into the Legion season together. And that was your summer ball team going through high school. So a lot of the events that now, your World Wood Bats, or, you go to Georgia, you go to Florida. I never did any of that. I tend to stay local, would hit up New York, Diamond Nation in New Jersey, some local tournaments in Pennsylvania. But through Legion, and then we always in Pennsylvania had this thing. It was the East West Showcase. So you would go through a series of, your regional and your events. There was probably 3 events leading up into the East West game, that were showcase type days, where you would run, you would hit, you would throw, and college coaches would be there, and that would all lead into the East West game, which would happen over some at some point over the summer in Harrisburg, usually at where the Harrisburg Senators play. So that was, I think where I first got a little bit of, recruitment, and some teams were starting to show some interest. And then always in the fall, I would go, and that would be the time when I would play AAU, over the fall season. But yeah, and that was usually my, I would say, junior senior year. I was really getting into fall baseball. Prior to that, I was a soccer player, so I would play soccer, and then freshman sophomore year, I would say I would sprinkle in some fall baseball when I could, and I would go to some tournaments with some AAU teams, when the weekends allowed and when the scheduling allowed. But then from there, was not like this highly recruited guy. I was low 80s in high school for most of the time. And I was low 80s probably when I got at the peak of my recruitment. So I had some Division I offers, from like St. Joe's and Philly and Hartford, and I took a visit to VMI, but for the most part, it was a lot of the state schools, Division II schools, that were interested, which really isn't a bad thing. Going through it, at the time, I don't think my eyes were really open to what Division II had, especially in the conference that we played and the people that were coming out of that conference. But then going through it for 3 years, it's a great place to play, and a great place to be able to get to the next level. So from there, a lot of the D1 saw me as a reliever, and kind of. The one thing I wanted is I had a couple priorities that I wanted to set prior to the recruitment process. Just talking to my high school coach and my parents. Cause I think the parents play a big part, especially when you're talking the financial piece of being recruited to some of these schools. So they were involved in the process as well, to an extent, but I wanted to be somewhere where my parents were going to be able to see me play, not in the same neighborhood, but I was within driving distance to them being able to come see me play. Millersville from my hometown was an hour and a half. So I felt like that was a perfect distance to, on a Friday, Saturday, they can take a drive out, watch me pitch, and go home. And then at the time I was a two-way player. I hit and pitched, so I wanted the opportunity to do both. Not to say, it lasted maybe a year and a half at Millersville until the velo started to spike, and, my eyes were kind of open that, hey, I might have a shot at turning this into something, and really wasn't aware of what it could turn into. But then, the biggest thing for me was I wanted to look into a school that was going to not hand me playing time, but at least I would have the chance to earn the playing time and compete for playing time. Some of these big schools, and it's great. If you want to go to a big school and you want that big school feel, that's great. That really wasn't me. And I wasn't someone who was going to have the patience to kind of just wait my turn at an opportunity. And Millersville was the place that we settled on, that Coach Sheehan, I think he does a great job at giving all his players, whether it's freshman or senior, it's the guy who's going to perform is the guy who's going to play. And if it's a freshman who turns out to be the junior and senior, then so be it. But I win at least that opportunity to go in and compete for some playing time right off the bat. Was fortunate to do so. Ended up starting all 3 years there, and then getting drafted. And at that point, I moved into more of a reliever's role. But coming out of high school, fastball changeup, a little bit of a slurve, but it really wasn't anything special. And then even in college, priorities were fastball changeup with a little bit of a breaking ball just to keep guys off balance.
When you got there, you talked about having that velo spike, right? And obviously that played a role in helping you get to where you are now. But a lot of guys obsess over the velocity, and rightfully so. Like we all know it matters. But was there anything like? What was the thing that kind of checked the box there? Like, was it you just got in the weight room, you just started to dedicate yourself more to it? Like it was the system that you guys were in? Like anything that you can like put a finger on in terms of like how that actually happened for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at all those things combined, I think they all played a part. Coming out, I was probably 6'2", let's call it 180. So really was kind of thin, but had some room to put on some weight. And I think it was a combination of I got into a weight room routine, and it wasn't until college where I was really just baseball only and committed to baseball every day, and the craft and the stuff that goes into being a good baseball player. So the weight room routines definitely were influential. When I summer going into freshman year, I sent an email to Coach Sheehan, and I just asked, hey, what do I need to do to be prepared for the fall season? And at the time, nobody really knew weighted balls, or their benefits, or anything. You heard weighted balls, and I think at the time everything was negative about it. And people were kind of scared to implement weighted balls in fear of like hurting a guy's arm. So his response was, max long toss 3 days a week, come in, pull down phase. So I started doing that, started really gaining some arm strength. And I think just all encompassing, when you look at the weight room routine, being able to put on some weight, and then also getting on a pretty regimented throwing program, when you put them all together, I think they all, attributed to that velo spike. And the spike was, I'd say I was probably 81, 84 when I was coming out. And then freshman year, I was like 86 to 88, sophomore year 88 to 91, and then junior year 90, 93, and I would touch a 94 if I was feeling good during a game. So it wasn't like it just all clicked. I went from 81 to 91. It was very gradual, small increments, that over time got to be 10 plus miles an hour increase on a fastball.
Did you end up having to change how you pitched a little bit when you got that velo, or do you think like not being, because I've seen some guys who weren't high velo guys who, when they had that jump, it actually really benefited them because they had some of that pitchability early because they couldn't get guys out by just throwing it by them. Like, do you think that? Be curious just to get your thoughts on like how that velo jump kind of incorporated into your pitch mix, and did it change how you attack guys, or do you feel like you benefited from not being a high velo guy early on?
Um, I think if anything, it helped for sure. I don't know if it changed exactly the way I pitched. Obviously, I could use the fastball a lot more, but I used my fastball a lot in general, and just kind of relied on moving it around. But I would say I benefited from the extra velo spike because then I could start really pitching with the fastball and knowing that it was a pitch that I can throw past guys.
No, that makes sense. That makes a ton of sense. What when you got to college, and me and Keith have both experienced this. Like Keith was the head coach for 5 years, and I coached for a decade too. Like some guys make the transition really easy, and they get to campus and they're able to settle in. And for some guys, it's a lot more difficult. Like anything that you ran into in that transition period when you were getting on campus that was kind of eye opening, or did you feel like you were pretty prepared walking onto campus?
I think there were some difficult transitions, more so from a routine aspect. You're your first winter, or first, once fall stops, that first, off season training at the college. So I guess you're November when you're waking up for 6 a.m. lifts. Um, that's kind of a bit of eye opening stuff, and it wasn't so much, obviously the baseball. There's a little bit of a learning curve in making that jump from high school to college when you're talking about playing with 22-year-olds, 20, when you're 18 and you're just like, man, like I'm playing with men, like these guys are grown up. um, so there's a bit of a curve there, but I think from a routine standpoint, that's where I had to speed up, my the curve even more, is like learning what the day to day was going to be like when you think about class, study hall, practice. How do you get your weights in? All that kind of stuff. So that was where I think was the toughest part, because the team in general. I was so fortunate with where I ended up and the program, because at the time Millersville, we weren't the Division two. They weren't the Division two powerhouse that they are now. It's funny. I look at the arms that they bring in, and I'm like, Coach, would you even have recruited me had you had a program like this right now? So we joke around about it, because I'm like, you don't have a 81, 84 lefty stepping on campus anymore. It just, so. But no, I was fortunate with the program, with the guys that were there, that the seniors were great at taking freshmen kind of under their wing, showing them the ropes, and really teaching them. I think that's huge, is when you have a core of guys who are willing to kind of take guys under their wing and show them how things are done at the school, as opposed to just being out there on your own. And it's like, here you go, freshman, learn by yourself. I could see situations like that being tough. But there was a great group of guys, and we had a great freshman class that really bonded and understood that we were going to kind of go through the learning curve together. And I think that was huge, is just kind of that culture that has been built there, and kind of welcoming freshmen, and instead of pushing them away, kind of welcoming them in and showing them how things are done there.
I think that's huge. I mean, it's overstated probably nowadays. You'll hear everyone talk about culture, but I don't think Millerville is not where they are now without that culture being instituted a long time ago. I mean, Coach Sheehan is, in my opinion, one of the best coaches in college baseball. But I wanted to kind of go back briefly for, you mentioned you played soccer. I don't know if you played a winter sport too. But I wanted to just kind of get your thoughts on, what do you think being a multi-sport athlete for as long as you, like, how do you think that benefited you, even when you got to college, or even, now, like all the athleticism that goes into that stuff, like, because nowadays you have so many people that want to specialize early. What do you think like for you personally, how did it benefit you?
Yeah. So to start off, I think I played a bunch of sports growing up, like youth sports. Like I was a roller hockey player for a little bit, and then played soccer. I played flag football. Never played. I played tackle football 2 years in middle school, but was very bad, so kind of got out of there quick. But high school, I was soccer for 2 years. Freshman, sophomore year, I was 4 years of basketball, and then 4 years of baseball. So basketball and baseball were the two sports that I enjoyed the most. And I think looking back, it's like, it was nice going kind of even with two sports. I felt like, in the fall I was playing baseball on the weekends, and I was doing basketball during the week with basketball practices to get ready for the season. So after school, I'd go work out with the basketball team, and at night I'd, a couple times a week, you'd get together with the AAU team, have a practice, and then the weekend you'd play tournaments. So I felt like it was a great kind of change of pace, where it wasn't just baseball training, whether it was, in the weight room, oh, you're training for baseball, and then, every day after school you're doing something. I enjoyed the change of pace, and at the same time I enjoyed staying competitive. So it wasn't like there was a break in that switch getting turned off, where, oh, I'm training for development. It was, I'm training for baseball, but I'm super competitive with basketball right now, where that fire was still being instituted, from, I wanted to win in whatever I played. So I think that kind of helps me. That I think, along with the various different athletic abilities you need for each sport, and kind of becoming the total package when you look at an athlete, I think from a competitive side, it helped me the most because I was just competitive all year round. There was never a time where I wasn't trying to beat another team or beat somebody in a sport.
Yeah, I think that's huge, because I mean, specialization is obviously something that's going on nowadays, and we get asked this question, and I don't necessarily know what the right answer is, and I think sometimes it's hard for Andy and I to kind of parse through that a little bit because both of us were 3-sport athletes. Like I played football, I wrestled, and I played baseball. So like it was, I feel the same way for me growing up. Like, I mean, I played a lot of sports, but I was. Your football is my basketball. Like I was horrific at basketball. Like I got cut in second grade.
Yeah.
But like the compete aspect was always there. Like I wanted to win in whatever it was I wanted or whatever it was I was doing. I used to joke with my guys all the time. I'm like, guys, like if I'm playing Scrabble against my grandmother, like I'm going for blood. Like I'm trying to win this.
Yeah.
This isn't. I don't have that off switch. But I think it's important for kids because that and I think Traz said it the one day, like our sport is super hard to be able to try to replicate the compete factor in like practice. You know what I mean? Like it's a little bit harder to do. And I think if you can find other ways to not necessarily step away from baseball, but at least still be able to compete in other things, like and keep that going and while giving you that refresh that I think younger kids need. Because I think sometimes you just kind of, I love this game, but like, we know as well as anyone, like it can get kind of boring if you're just throwing bullpens and going through your long toss and hitting in a cage all the time. It's like, all right, well, like when are we going to play? I think some kids like that's where you see a little bit of the burnout, aside from some of the other stuff. But I think that's where some of it can come in because you're not always competing in it. And I think that's what like when you go to play something, like I believe like you should be competing in it, and that's where I think a lot of the fun comes. I think sometimes that gets sucked out of it a little bit when you kind of specialize in things.
Yeah, I definitely think there's like this, like you said, it's such a tough question to answer. Like, oh, should you play multiple sports or not? And it's like, well, you kind of like want to become the best all around athlete. And in order to do that, you might need to compete at multiple sports. But then it's like, well, am I risking not being as good at one sport if I do multiple sports? And it is a tough situation. And I think it's easier, I think, at the youth level to be like, hey, we're going to stay active. We're going to do multiple sports. You're going to play something in every season. And as you kind of climb the ladder and get to high school, I think it becomes real tough anymore to be a multi-sport athlete, which is kind of unfortunate. And some of it is some pressure, I feel like, from some programs where it's like, hey, if you want to be on my field and if you want to start, you got to be committed to this program, and that's a full year commitment. And I don't think that's the right thing to tell a high school athlete either, because hey, if I want this kid to be an athlete, and if my best players are all around the best athletes, then in order to do that, they're gonna have to play multiple sports. And obviously it's easy for me to say that. I went to a smaller high school. I think our class was 250 in our graduating class, and it's I get that there's a challenge when you go to some of these bigger schools. You're fighting. Not only do I need to compete in order to stay on the basketball team with X amount of guys, but then I have to do it all over again in baseball, and I have to stay just as sharp in both. So I see the challenges, and I just, it's a very tough question to answer, but I think up until high school, you should try and become the best athlete, and see where it takes you. Because at the youth level, your college scholarship's not going to come at age 12, so it's like become the best all around athlete that you can, and see where it takes you.
Yeah, and I think
parents sometimes they don't get scholarships at age 12 though.
Yeah.
I think there's some like you might face some adversity in some other sports. Like you might be good, but you might not be the best. Like you might be one of the best baseball players in your sport or at your school, but you might be the, fifth best, sixth best hoops player. Like there's some adversity there you're going to have to work through in order to get a little bit more burn. And I think, to your point, when you're talking about when you get to campus and you're 81 to 84, and then, you go through there's a lot of things that change. Yeah, it's incremental, but there's a lot of stuff that goes on. Like you don't just wake up one day and you're throwing 88. Like you have to actually go through that because you get on campus and you're like, wow, like you said it, you're playing with men. It's the same, every freshman in campus who goes and plays baseball, like at some point during your freshman year, you're gonna be like, whew, I'm playing with men here. And I think like if you can face a little bit of that adversity sometimes, like I think you're better suited, if you do end up going and playing, whether it's baseball, college baseball or not, like if you go play college hoops or college football or wrestle, whatever it might be, like you're gonna face adversity. And, I think some of that, like if you can learn that at a younger age, I think that can be a little bit more invaluable for kids as they go through, their college recruitment process and eventually ending up at a school.
Yeah. And the multiple sports aspect, again, I keep going back to this, and it's like that competitiveness. It's like when you step on campus as a freshman, and you're trying to compete for that spot, well, guess what? You might have to beat out a guy who is bigger, stronger than you because he's been there 4 years and he has the routine down and he's gained his weight. And so it's like when you're faced with challenges, how are you going to rise to them? And I think that competitive edge of there's no season off in terms of being competitive, and whether it's collectively as a team or whether it's individually, like your goal is to beat whoever it is you're playing against. And it's similar to going on campus, and it's, you got to compete for that spot. Like it's not going to be handed to you. So you got to rise up and you got to face adversity and you got to overcome those challenges. And sometimes playing all these sports is a way of doing that. I think you're absolutely right.
I think this is a good segue question based off of what we're the topic we're on. But what, the differences in high school and college, I think we've covered a lot on this podcast, and we can get into it a little bit more here too. But like, what are the differences from college to pro ball that you saw, that things that you had to kind of go through and figure out to find the success that you've obviously been able to find at that level?
Yeah. It's funny because I had two of probably the worst years of pro ball I think anybody could ever have. I had like a 7 through my first 2 years of pro ball. And it was like, as much of the learning curve is in college, I think it gets sped up twice as fast in pro ball. And I don't know if I was, again, I got drafted, but I don't know if I was ready for that. Just in terms of like stuff wise and command, like I think I was really good that junior year at Millersville and at Division II level, but I don't think stuff wise and being fine tuned, I wasn't prepared to move on to pro ball. And I really had like a sink or swim type of moment after my second year. I had gotten sent down and I finished up, I went 2 weeks without even being in a game. It was just like bullpen work and stuff like that. And eventually I got kind of brought in last week of the season, and the pitching coach was like, listen, you got to show us something. Like, we can't keep doing this, having these results and you're just like hanging on. You kind of got to show us something that proves that you're worth keeping around. And I was on the chopping block. So it was a very sink or swim type of off season, completely like refined my delivery. And, I had these long arms and legs and I was just kind of gangly and like you had limbs just coming at you. And I really had to learn how to like control my body, shorten some stuff up, and went into that spring and had a really good spring. Saw the velo tick a little bit. I think I entered pro ball and I just like pitched scared, to be quite honest. And I think the velo took a dip because of that, just lack of confidence. You're getting hit around all over the place and you're like, man, like just get it, just kind of place it in the box type of thing. which didn't make it any better. So I wasn't attacking guys with my best stuff, and really went into spring as like a, hey, I got to give this everything I have. And if I'm going out throwing 95, 96. Like if they're going to release me, then I need them to release me on terms that I'm willing to accept and go home with. So yeah, those first 2 years of just getting pounded were not fun. But again, it was kind of like, I wanted, it was a big challenge and a big mountain to climb, and just was able to refine some things, was fastball slider. And I was always 4-seam slider guy up until I got, till right before I had surgery. And then I started tinkering with a 2-seam, and that's all I throw now. But had to really refine my command, had to get it in the box, in the zone, and really attack guys with my best stuff. And then just kind of built, once you have some good outings and you're able to kind of build confidence, that, it just keeps snowballing. And I just I really rode that wave in low A. Got a spot start because unfortunately one of our pitchers couldn't start that day. So I got a spot start and really had a really good game, probably my best game up to date in pro ball, and rode the wave in the high A, had a great high A season. Went to double A, and I thought that was the toughest level because I felt like I was performing at a decent level, but then I got there, and another like learning point where I just had a rough month. So it's been interesting up until 2019. I had been demoted once every season. So you're talking 2013 to 19. I had taken my lumps, and I had gotten demoted every year at some point up until 2019. So there's some challenges, some adversity, but it was kind of like a game of just constantly adapting to what the level has to offer, what the hitters are showing me at each level, that it kind of opens your eyes to, man, I didn't realize like I was getting away with this. So now I got to work on something new in order to combat what the hitters are showing me at each level. So it was never a finish. I think at baseball in general and pitching in general, like the product is never finished. Like you're constantly tinkering with something, whether it's like a new pitch, or it's tinkering with your delivery, or it's your arsenal, or it's the way you attack guys. Like there's this cat and mouse game that I just really enjoy of, okay, the hitters are doing this to me. Okay, how am I going to combat that and do something different? So that was, looking back, it was like a tough journey, but it was also awesome to kind of come out on top and really look back and see how far I've come, and all the tinkering and all the adjustments that I've made in order to make it.
Yeah, you mentioned you found that slider, but you also mentioned that when you got to college, you were like fastball changeup.
Yeah.
Like I imagine, like you pitch out of the bullpen now left-handed, like that slider's got to be something that probably had a significant impact on your ability to get where you go. Like how did you go about developing that, considering that, when you were in college, like it really wasn't something that you went to? Like, it was that one of those moments where you're like, shoot, I need to figure out how to throw this thing, or was it something that kind of came along slowly?
A little bit of both. I think I made maybe 3 starts in pro ball, and 2 of them were rough, and one of them was decent. But when you moved to the pen, it was kind of the first conversation we had with pitching coaches was, listen, a lot of relievers anymore, like it's hard to find one that's just fastball changeup. All of them have some form of breaking ball, and at the time they're like some form of hard slider. So it was a development, kind of like heading into the off season / throughout my low A year in 2000, and it would have been 15. Where it kind of really started taking on. It started off as just playing catch with it. I even borderline long toss with it, and I don't know if I would recommend that, but I was at like 90 feet probably, and I was just like stepping behind and trying to feel that shape and feel like myself commanded a little bit, and and it started off, I would say, short, and it even the harder it was, I felt like the more it turned into a cutter. And it was a hard slider paired with a hard fastball, and that was kind of some of the things that I learned when I got called up was, man, everything I throw is hard. How can I create some separation from fastball to slider to keep some hitters off balance? But up until that point, it was hard fastball, hard slider, and it was just a matter of like throwing it, playing catch with it, and I had to throw it a lot, and I had to throw it with some intent in order to get some authentic shape on it, to learn how to kind of tinker and fine tune that pitch.
For all the young pitchers who are listening to this, it takes time to make some of these adjustments, and I think we're in a day where that instant gratification is something that kids want. But it might not take a 6-week off season with your pitching coach to really find what you need to do, and like being able to stick with something. And I mean, it sounds like you spent a lot of time trying to make that pitch what it is today, which is, I mean, it's a big piece of your repertoire. Am I right?
Yeah. It's a piece that I use. It's hard. It's tough because like I came off the past 2 years where I'm like, 75 to 80% fastball. So I use my fastball a lot. And then, but like you need something to complement the fastball, and it took time, and it's still taking time. Like I'm still trying to fine tune it. I'm trying to make it a pitch that, has some more depth and some more separation in velocity off of it. But no, it's definitely taken time, and it's still, like I said, there's still always this tinkering, and it's still not a finished product. And I'm hoping that, but it is something that I have to use. Just with who you're facing, and I can't just go out there and throw 100% fastballs. So you need something to pair off of it. And I felt like something with some depth. And no, I'd say definitely the past 2 years, it's come along really well in terms of having the shape and the velocity that I want to, but was definitely not something that kind of just happened overnight. It took some time and took some hours on the mound and in the pen, and just really having to throw it in order to see it and really fine tune that type of pitch.
Yeah, I think you touch on something there that is important in baseball. Like, aside from the incremental increases that you're going to have to get in order to find success at where you are, like even just throwing your slider and catch play is something where you can get the feel for it. And we were talking pre-show about someone we know who pitches in the Yankees organization. Like, I've literally watched him long toss 100 times in my life, and he long tosses with his changeup. Like, there's a reason that he can throw a power changeup and it's good. But like, for him, it's constantly getting the feel at a further distance to see where it is. But I think that, to take it a step further, like from a coaching standpoint, this is why like you can get so much done in just your throwing program, and either tinkering with stuff during your throwing program, or if you're a position guy, working on stuff during your throwing program that you're not going to work on during practice, that you can kind of get a couple more things done that day that is going to get you that kind of incremental percent better at what it is that you're trying to do. I know at Columbia with their catchers do catch play, where like they're working on, they're literally working on throwing down to second base or third base and tag plays at home plate during their throwing program, because that's not stuff that you're going to be able to cover every day at practice. But if you do it every day in practice, like, you're going to eventually get to be pretty good at it. So when it comes in game, it's just kind of second nature. But I think that the idea behind being able to just, grip a two-seam slider and start throwing snapdragons left and right and getting swings and misses, like, it takes more time than just doing it 3 or 4 times in catch play and then once in a bullpen. Like, it's a constant process of understanding where you're at and what can get better with it, so that you can continue to kind of feature it and get outs with it.
Yeah. And I think like there's sometimes you get young pitchers and they're like, hey, I throw 5 pitches. And it's one of those things where it's like, well, why don't we take 3 and just get really good at throwing those 3, as opposed to five. And you want to really have three. I would rather have 3+ above average pitches than five average pitches. I don't think it's a challenge for me, at least when I think of even mixing in a third pitch. I'm a 2-pitch guy, and even when I think about adding a pitch, it's, well, how am I going to use it? If I have 2 pitches that I rely on and I add a third, it's like, okay, in what situation am I going to use it? And in what situation am I going to be confident enough to use it? So those are just some preliminary challenges that I think people face when they go about, finding a pitch or adding a pitch even.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think one of the things we run into with high school guys, and I know that college guys, they get on campus and they're like, well, I got a 2-seam, I got a 4-seam, I got a breaking ball, I got a slider. Then you get them on the track, man, and you're like, dude, you got 2 pitches, man. They're all like, your breaking balls are the same and your fastballs are the same. Like, let's dial in on having 2 really good ones. Like, it's something I've talked about with Eric a bunch is I'll send him data and he'll walk me through, like, here's what I'm seeing. And a lot of times he's like, hey, there's no separation here. Like, you kind of got to pick one side of the table and like tell this kid, hey, scrap the breaking ball and let's really focus on the slider because that's got some promise. And sometimes narrowing your focus allows you to be more successful in those spots. And I think that's kind of what you're driving at.
Yeah. I think if you narrow the focus and then you really work on fine tuning those things that you want, that are your focus. So if you're a 2-pitch guy, it's like, okay, command it, and really make that your thing and hone in on what your game is. If you're a 4-seam splitter guy or 2-seam slider guy, like really hone in on how you're going to attack hitters and go command those pitches.
I'd love to hear a little bit about the day in the life of Tim in the off season and in the in season from like a preparation perspective. Because I think how kids prepare, I think, is something that they have to learn, and understanding that, like, if you got to start on Saturday, and I know it's a little bit different for you right now being a bullpen guy, but what do you do to make sure that you're good to go on game day? I think is something that gets missed a lot when we focus in the recruiting process. It's all focused on the result in front of the coaches. And I think sometimes it gets lost that if you've got to start on Saturday, that Saturday start is usually dictated by what you did Sunday through Friday. So I'd love to hear a little bit kind of how you prepare during the off season, and then kind of like what your process is during the season to make sure that you're ready to go and go out there and compete for when they call your number.
Yeah, so I'll start with the off season just because it's kind of like what we're just coming off of. So I'll take probably 2 weeks off, completely off, and I feel like it's getting shorter and shorter with age. So I just turned 32. I was talking today with our strength coach just about the off season, how even the 2 weeks off, I feel like the on ramp is just like a little tougher to get going after having 2 weeks of, and I don't just sit around and do nothing. Like I'll move around, play some golf, or walk around and go on hikes or whatnot. Just whatever it is to keep myself moving. So I was even talking to him today that, hey, I think what might be beneficial is the end of the season, taking a 1 week like deload, like off ramp, 1 week completely off, and then starting the on ramp. So I guess it would be 1 week out of the year where I'm off throwing. But no, this year I took 2 weeks off, and then I'll usually start with 3 days a week. I'll throw a baseball, and those other 2 days aren't off. I'm still going to the gym 5 days a week, and I'm lifting. I start off with lifts 3 days a week, throwing 3 days a week, but the other 2 days are movement days where I'll do plyos. I'll do some water bag stuff, some water ball drills, and then eventually it'll go to 4 days a week of lifts, and then I'll probably pick up a baseball 5 days a week once we start getting into it, and there's a phase where I'm just doing some like delivery stuff, and I enjoy the water bag and the water ball drills to really kind of hone in on some of the um, delivery issues that I might see, or things I want to clean up throughout my delivery. Uh, and I'll do that with the water bag, water ball, and I'll touch that probably 3 days a week, I would say. Um, and then I'll go through a phase where it's just like an on ramp phase where it's a month, and then I'll go through another month where I'm long tossing and I'm building. So long toss, and then on Fridays probably some pull downs, or some running guns even. And I think that's the best way. There's running guns where guys are pulling down 101. I'm not one of those guys. I'll get up to like 97 on a running gun. I love it in terms of like measuring intent, having a gun, because it's a radar gun on you, because it's tough to, and part of it's like a competitive thing, right? Like we're making the atmosphere competitive to where there's a handful of us that are going through running guns, and it's like, all right, who's going to be the guy today? So I think it's a great job of kind of measuring intent, and then that'll lead into bullpens. So my bullpens will usually start after the new year. Before the new year, I might do some short box stuff where I'm at like 50 feet and I'm feeling the slope, and I'll have one of those black targets with the white dot sitting there, and I'll use that as my target, and then I'll I'll go I'll go into a bullpen where bullpens down here, they're Mondays and Thursdays. Back home, I was doing them Tuesdays and Fridays, and I'll have one day. So Mondays are usually medium days for me in terms of throwing. So I'm getting out to probably 150 to 180, and I'm coming down, and it's not full intent, but I'm at least bringing it in. So 150 to 180. Tuesday is max long toss, pull down leading into a pen. Wednesday is a light day, so I'll play catch at like 60, 75 feet. Thursday is usually a moderate medium day. Same thing, 150 to 180. And then Friday, again, max long toss, pull down into a high intent bullpen. And that's kind of the week in terms of throwing. I do different plyos depending on what the day is. On the lighter days, it's probably reverse throws and pivot picks, and some other days I'll implement some of the other weights and get off a slope and do some windmills, and some other variations of weighted balls with the various weights. And then for lifts, it's Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and it alternates upper lower with some form of cardio going on those 4 days as well. So pretty packed. But in terms of like prep in order to get ready for that first time I throw a baseball, it's usually 45 minutes of foam roll, some stretching, and then I go through a dynamic warm up, and then I'll go through my plyos and water bag stuff for about 15 minutes, and then get into picking up a baseball. So you're talking a full hour prior to even touching a baseball, and getting into your throwing program. But that's the off season. In season, it's a little different just because of the volume of throwing kind of picks up, with the amount of times that you have to be ready to go. The Jays, I think, do a great job at keeping an eye on our throwing load, and keeping an eye. If we go back to back, unless they're very short appearances, usually you're down that third day. Whether they're short appearances or later in the season, you might all hands are kind of on deck at that point come September. So in season, my plyos usually, unless I am down or unless I haven't thrown in a little bit, my plyos usually are just reverse throws, pivot picks, and I go into catch play. And that'll vary. I'm kind of on my own not on my own, but just it's not as structured as the off season because you don't know when you're going to throw as a pen guy. So if you've thrown 2 days, it's going to be a super light day that third day, and you might be down. If you haven't thrown, your throwing load might be a little heavier because you need to throw more in order to prepare for the game. So whatever throwing you have to do, and that's why here we like to pair up with guys who think the same way in terms of the throwing distance. That way, for the most part, you're on the same page. And then if I hadn't touched a mound in 2 days, I usually get off the mound and I'll throw like a 10 to 15 pitch touch and feel to a catcher just because I want to get off the mound. I'm a guy who loves getting off the mound, and who I feel like I'm more prepared and I'm sharper the more that I touch the mound, even if it's for a few pitches here, a few pitches there. And I actually prefer the mound over a flat ground. So if I had the choice every day, I would just get on the mound for 5 to 10 pitches as my flat ground. Obviously some cases are you don't have that opportunity. So flat ground, but I enjoy kind of getting the flat ground or the mound and seeing the ball, kind of, again, creating as much of a game atmosphere for those 5 to 10 as I can. That way I get a gauge of maybe where I'm at that day.
Yeah, the down the mound stuff seemed. I've talked to Eric about this a bunch, and he's a big believer in that too. That like if you can get on the mound and you're not overstressing yourself, that there's just a ton of value of being able to get down that slope and like feel your body move down that slope. So it seems to be more of a trend. I mean, shoot, it wasn't long ago, like 10 years ago, that pitchers were running distance and like you threw flat grounds, and the only time you touched the rubber was when you threw your bullpen or you got into the game. And the throwing as a whole and the preparation, you're talking about having an hour preparation before you even pick up a ball. Like it's come so far. And I think it speaks to the level of preparation you need to have in order to be successful. And it's something I think young guys, not that they need to have your routine, but I think it's important them to hear from guys who are at their absolute top of their field. Like, how do you get ready to go throw a baseball? What does your off season look like? Because they can implement some of this stuff. And I think it's important for them to hear it, especially if they've got aspirations of playing in college. So that's it's always interesting to hear how guys prepare. So very cool. The last question we usually close out with is, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, but I want to hit it on two spots. One, we usually ask if you were going to give some advice to some student athletes on the recruiting process, what would you give them? And I thought you had some really cool insights about how you went through it. So I'd love to hear some advice there. But the other one would be about the development, right? Like your development timeline took you a couple of years to become the guy who got drafted by the Blue Jays. And I'd love to hear if you got any advice from folks from a recruiting perspective and from a development perspective.
Yeah. Man, the recruiting side, I think you got to find out, what you got to prioritize what you want in your college experience. I think that's the probably the biggest thing is like, what school do you want to go to? I think you have to be realistic in your expectations with what you're looking at and where you see yourself in the spectrum of D1 to D2 to D3. I think you have to be open-minded to the thought. Even myself, and I think everybody who plays baseball and thinks college is realistic wants to be that Division I athlete, and you want to go to the best and the biggest Division I schools. So I think you just have to be more. You have to be open-minded to who you are at that point. Not to say that you're not going to go to college and take off and become awesome, and that's realistic. But I think for the most part, go somewhere that fits you, fits what you want in your college experience. And I myself, the competitor in me would want to go someplace where I have a shot at playing. And it kind of goes hand in hand because the development piece can take you really far, but in order to get good at the game and good at your craft, like you have to play and you have to compete. So I would prioritize going somewhere where, again, I'm not saying go somewhere where you're going to get handed playing time, but go to a program that's A, going to challenge you, and B, going to allow you to compete for some playing time right away. So do your homework. figure out where you fit in that spectrum, and kind of go from there. There's some D3s that are better than D2s, and there's some D2s that are probably better than some D1s. So I think it's about having that opportunity to play and having a program that fits your personality and fits what you want out of that college experience. From a development side, it's come so far, in terms of the technology that's there. So it doesn't happen overnight, but I think the speed at which you can get better has come a long way. Just from a pitching side with TrackMan and Rhapsodo, like you can find out what your arsenal is and figure out like, oh, if I throw a 4-seam now, but the ball data is not great, maybe it's worth me testing a 2-seam, and seeing what happens there. So I would say, kind of be patient on the development side. Again, I am an impatient person myself, so it's hard for me to say that, knowing that, I'm the guy who, if I'm testing out a new pitch and pitch one, it's not great, I'm like, all right, we're done, I'm over it. But it does take time, and it does take just daily efforts, and it's like, how can you get that 1% better each day at your craft? It's kind of like, everybody says it, but I think that it's true in some aspects. Is every time you pick up a ball, there should be a goal, and there should be a way for you to get better on that day, and just be honest and self-coach, and yeah. So anything else you guys wanted me to touch on in terms of development? I kind of like went through them, but
the self-coach piece, I love that.
Yeah,
I love that, because I feel like a lot of kids, and even college guys, like they're so reliant on getting feedback from other people. And I think there comes a time as a player where you have to be able to self-coach, and you have to be able to self-adjust, especially in those in-game moments, where you need to be able to make an adjustment, and you need to recognize what you did with a certain pitch so that you can self-correct. And I think that self-awareness and getting really comfortable with what you do and how you move and the things that work for you. We talked about it earlier, but we had JP on a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about not being cookie cutter about things and understanding that people do things different ways. And I think it's important for the player to get comfortable with what they do and really understand what works for them, so that they have the ability to make those adjustments. So self-coach, that's a great cue for kids and a great cue for players.
Yeah. And I'm not going to sit here and say, I think results kind of breed some confidence. There is some aspect to that where, I could do all the development stuff and I can try to hone in on my repertoire all I want. But if at some point, if I'm not getting the results that I'm looking for, then how am I supposed to be confident in my craft and this and that, and it's tough. Everybody wants to do well. Everybody wants to have great results. And I think that's where the technology piece can kind of come in. Like, man, I threw that pitch. I'm throwing this pitch great right now. Like, why is it getting hit? Well, maybe the ball data on it's not great. Maybe you're just not made to kind of be that 4-seam guy. I wasn't. I was pumping 4-seams for years, and then kind of got up there and got touched a little bit and realized, man, the ball data on my 4-seam is very average, and here I am trying to throw up in the zone with an average 4-seam, and it just wasn't working. So that's when I dove into throwing a 2-seam, and it had good action, and I was getting good results, and the combination of those two then bred more confidence in it, to the point where I use it all the time. I scratch the 4-seam, and that's just like a personal instance, and that's a personal story, but I think the development piece is out there. I think there's a lot of places that have some real good tech and real good coaches that can help. But again, you have to trust what you're doing out there. the tech and the coaches aren't the ones throwing the pitch. You got to be able to throw the pitch and have confidence in whatever pitch you're going to throw. And I think it's all just there as a way of helping you kind of create that arsenal and that repertoire that is going to get you the most success.
Yeah, and I think you touched on two things on the recruitment piece that we talk about a lot too. Everyone wants to chase the Division I, whatever, and play there. And I think that it's a phenomenal goal to have. I mean, Andy and I talked about this. Like we play Division I baseball. Like I don't identify at 37 years old as a former Division I student athlete. And I don't know, like to your point at Millersville now, like I don't know if I would get recruited to play at Marist right now. Like it's changed a little bit. But going somewhere where you're going to be challenged and you're going to be able to develop it and find the right fit, I think is a huge component of it, which is what we try to get through. And the other part is like there are Division III schools that are better than Division IIs and ones, and there's a lot of Division IIs that are better than Division. I coached Division II baseball for a year down in Alabama, and it was like, I'm an upstate New York guy. I've said this on here, but I went down and coached in the Gulf South. We were 6th in the country. Like it's big boy baseball. Like there are a lot of really good players that are playing Division II baseball. And I mean, shoot, Millersville has had 10 draft picks under Coach Sheehan. Like we will have him on this podcast eventually. It's a goal of Andy and I's, but like there's not a lot of guys out there that in any division that can say that they have 10 10 draft picks that are currently playing right now or coaching, excuse me. So, I think that culture that you talked about earlier, and like, if there's 10 draft picks, like I'm assuming there's a ton of pitchers of the year and players of the year. Like you're walking into a hyper competitive environment where you're going to play super competitive baseball and you're going to compete at a national level, which I think, you ask anybody, if you're going to go play college baseball and compete nationally and win championships, like ultimately that's what you want to do, right? Like, and we have this conversation with people all the time, like, hey man, like you go to that school, but it's going to be really tough being 10 and 45 for 3 or 4 years. Like you also have an opportunity to go to this school where you're competing for championships and playing in regionals every year. Like your college experience is a lot better in a situation like that because you're going to get more out of it. And be able to compete at a super high level. And I think that that's something that gets lost when people just try to chase the divisions and don't necessarily understand how competitive Division II baseball is and how competitive Division III baseball is, because it's, at the end of the day, you still have to be really good to play college baseball. And, I think sometimes people kind of get caught up in the numbers and all of that stuff. But, I'm happy that you said that it was more, go to a place that's going to challenge you and somewhere where you're going to be able to develop. And, Millersville is obviously that place, but there's a lot of places out there that are not, your traditional Division I's that everyone kind of thinks of off the bat. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, this is, I'm on here, I'm telling kind of my story and my recruiting experience. It's just like, if I was good enough and I had the opportunity to go to the ACC and SEC and play some meaningful baseball, I'd jump at it. And there might be some people here who have those offers, and that's great. It just wasn't in the cards for me. And so, you got to rely on kind of, really doing some homework on some schools and seeing where you're going to have the best chance to develop and become the best player you possibly can. And if that's one of those big time schools, then kind of kudos to you. And on Friday nights, I might be a little jealous. But yeah, it's everybody's experience is going to be different. Everybody's going to get recruited by different schools, and the coaches are watching you and they're making judgment calls based off of that game. And the next weekend, you might have a great weekend, and other schools, are going to be knocking. I think one exercise that I did that I felt like was great was, I sat down by myself, and then my parents also sat down by themselves and just created pros and cons when it came down to 2 or 3 schools that I was deciding on. And that gave me my space, and I felt like I was able to sit in my bedroom, create pros and cons lists without somebody telling me, what they thought, and I could do it. And then my parents could also do it without me trying to convince them of a school. So I always felt that like that's always a good exercise to kind of get that stuff on paper, and look at it when it comes time to make that decision.
Well, can't thank you enough. Obviously, we wish you the absolute best this spring, man. Like, we're super thankful that Eric connected us. I know he loves you to death, and he thinks the world of you as a human being, and that's all we needed to know. So I really appreciate your time. Like, can't thank you enough. I know you're in the middle of getting ready for spring training. So, yeah, man, really appreciate it. And best of luck this spring. Best of luck this summer. And hope you have another fantastic year.
Thanks. Yeah, no, it's been a pleasure, and glad we were able to connect. And yeah, this has been awesome. So thanks for having me on.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. We'll talk again next week. Thank you for listening this week. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and smash that like button for us. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, as well as Spotify. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at EMD Baseball. If you want to find out what me and Keith do to help families and players navigate the recruiting process, go ahead and check us out on emdbaseball.com. Take a few minutes to check out our new online academy. I promise you'll get some good information out of that. Thanks again for listening. Check in with you next week.